Exposition, an LMC Experience original podcast. Welcome to the Los Medanos Exposition podcast. I'm your host, Micah Justin Trudeau Sims, and I'm here with my co-host, T.
Hello.
And we have a very special guest today, the interim president of the college, Los Medanos College, Dr. Pamela Ralston.
Thanks for having me, Micah. T, it's great to be here.
Yeah, of course.
It's we enjoy here. All right, what's that? So our first question we always like to ask our contestants or our guests.
Yes.
Is where'd you go to school before you were, to get into the job you are now?
Great. So I went to high school at a high school in Bend, Oregon called Mountain View High School. I went to college at the University of Oregon.
Mm.
I spent a really long time at the University of Washington doing my master's and my doctorate. And along the way, I spent a year in Norway in high school, and I spent a year in Denmark doing pre-doctoral research at the University of Copenhagen.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It was totally cool.
Very cool.
So what got you into this job in particular, or education in particular? Because I heard that you're a teacher before this.
Mm-hmm. I was not a great high school student, and I was a really big reader, and I didn't do a great job attending high school. And when I got a chance to go to college, I like to think of just kind of stepping onto the campus in Eugene, Oregon, and everything shifted for me. So getting a chance to study what I wanted, being really engaged in what I thought was the most important stuff at the time, totally shifted my worldview, and it gave me a chance to study really hard. I worked a couple of part-time jobs, and one of my part-time jobs was being a tutor. I was also, I helped profs proctor their exams, so I was the person who came into class and made sure nobody cheated. I helped grade, and I decided to go to graduate school, and I got a fellowship, and in order for me to uphold my fellowship, I taught, and I made a stipend. So they waived my tuition, and they paid me every month, which was an excellent thing. And I got to start teaching at 22, which was That's pretty crazy age to be teaching. Yeah. And I have never looked back.
Oh, it sounds great, actually.
It was excellent.
Especially at 22, that's
pretty young.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed really young. And so I actually had kind of a hard time the first couple of years that I was teaching because, I'd walk into class and students on the first day would be like, dude, are you in Ralston's class? I'd be like, dude, I'm Ralston. And so it was just kind of this funny time period. And so I figured out how to seem more like the teacher and dress more like the teacher and carry myself. And I think we all kind of learned together. And so those early classes of mine, I think I'm really grateful for.
So was this like high school or college?
It was college.
Oh, so you're teaching.
I taught at the University of Washington in the English department. I taught in the comparative literature department. Later, I taught in the American Ethnic Studies department.
Interesting.
Nice.
Is there a certain book that you really like to teach?
Yes.
Which one was that?
The book that I think kind of changed my whole life, which is Toni Morrison's Beloved.
Never heard of it.
She won the Nobel Prize for Literature. She's no longer with us, but Toni Morrison is probably, in my opinion, the preeminent African-American woman writer. She was an incredible publisher and editor. She helped other women work their way through difficulties of getting published. And Beloved is a story about a woman who was deeply impacted by slavery, and the story about how family and neighborhood and community can both continue that trauma with you or can help you step outside that trauma and live a new life. And her ideas about freedom and community have been really important to me ever since.
Great.
What made you want to get into the administrative side of things?
So I was a faculty member for 5 years at Tacoma Community College, and I was a lecturer at the University of Washington for 3. And I love teaching. I still...
Go Cougars, by the way.
They're Huskies at that one. Cougars are on the other side.
Oh, shoot.
Sorry, man. Cougars are great, too, but I'm a Husky and a Duck. teaching is the best work that I've ever done, and it's really hard. And when faculty don't have somebody who's out there kind of advocating for them, it makes it harder. And so I was one of those people who, over time, I just got really good at fixing things, and I kind of worked with faculty to change what we were teaching. I worked with our department to make some really important improvements, and over time, I just started being the person who stepped into the next role. So I was a faculty member, and then I was a department chair. Once I was a department chair, it made sense that I might become a dean. And in Washington State, I'd spent my whole life being a faculty member, a graduate student. And I moved to California and stepped over the line and moved into administration. And I was the dean for a set of programs called Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. So today we're in the music building at LMC. And that was some of my most favorite work, was getting to work with the musicians and the artists and the theater folks to be able to do really great, cool things with students.
She's lying about the theater kids. Theater kids are kind of weird, not going to lie.
That's not true. I will not be censored about the fabulousness of theater kids. Come on.
As a theater kid myself, nah.
Yeah.
Nah, dude. No, they suck.
They do get a little freaky sometimes.
I mean, before we get into like the actual tough questions, because we actually have some pretty...
I thought those were the tough questions.
No.
Oh,
No.
okay.
Oh, before we get into, because you're an English teacher, right?
Yeah.
Why did they make us read Shakespeare in like school? Because I absolutely hated his plays. He's like, there's no reason to read his stuff. I don't know.
So I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna see if T wants to weigh in on this. Why do we read Shakespeare?
I mean, like, I understand that, like, from the historical perspective, Shakespeare's work has been some of the most influential in the playwriting and poetic side of things. His ability to make stories is a very, I'd say it was very revolutionary for the time. That being said, in comparison to contemporary works, I do think that we give him a little bit too much credit. Like, going to state, there are 3 classes they're offering on the man. 2, that's already a lot to me. That's already 6 full units dedicated to one dude who wrote plays hundreds of years ago. 3 classes, 9 units. That's almost a full load. That's a lot of Shakespeare, in my opinion.
Okay, I think I have 9 units in Shakespeare on my transcript. There is some debate and conspiracy about whether or not it was one dude, for the record. There are a lot of people who are doing kind of linguistic research to see if the voice of Shakespeare, in fact, is consistent across all the works. There are some feminist theorists out there who think that Shakespeare might have actually been a woman writing under a pen name. And I'll tell you, one of the reasons why I like Shakespeare is Shakespeare wrote truth to power. So if you spend a lot of time reading Shakespeare, you can see that Shakespeare's poking fun at almost anyone who's got power. And if you're really good at reading Shakespeare, you will figure out how absolutely ribald, naughty, and dirty his works are. And the challenge is when we come to read them, we don't know what all this stuff means. But making the beast with 2 backs out of Othello, for example, is a pretty riotous way to talk about what sexual intimacy looks like. And so inside Shakespeare, you have to spend a lot of time kind of decoding. And so I think it's good for literature majors and general human beings to learn how to decode something important. I think it's good to look at our history and see who stood up to people who were abusive and oppressive and called it out. Art has a huge legacy, universally, of being a space where artists are able to call people in. So in African cultures, they talk about the griot, the storyteller who's able to do the same work. In Native American culture, there are trickster figures that do the same work. So if you look kind of across the globe, we want to find people who find strength in art to be able to rise up and help us make change. And so Shakespeare's an early one for us. He was also really gifted. And writing an iambic pentameter is really hard. And so just that is a good test of what our brains can do for us. Yeah. ChatGPT can't do that.
That's fair. I mean, but like... Canterbury Tales compared to the...
Okay, so Canterbury Tales were not written by Shakespeare, and they're actually 17 times naughtier. Chaucer. Geoffrey Chaucer.
I think
so much more fun.
I think it's just better than, I don't know. I think that the Canterbury Tales, like the old Middle English, which I read it in, it's like I think it's better at least to develop your brain a bit more. I don't know.
Okay. I think we'll leave that on the debate stage. Let's see where we go with that.
I do not have any dice in this game because I'm just not a Shakespeare guy. He's not my cup of tea.
I'm thinking if you're required to take at least 3 units, I think you're going to call me next year and you'll be like, you know what, Dr. Ralston.
Oh, I
read some stuff and I want to correct.
I thankfully did all my schedule planning. I have all my classes picked and I managed to avoid Shakespeare.
It's not a requirement to graduate?
Nope, not at all.
All right, it was for me.
Maybe if I was in
World's changed.
Maybe if I was in theater, it might have, but yeah, no, not.
No, I just had to do it in English. Yeah. Okay.
All right, you ready for the first rough one?
I'm screwing my courage to the sticking post.
So, a lot of people have had concerns about inclusion on campus, specifically for LGBTQ plus students, and a lot of people have wanted answers more immediately on those aspects, especially something like having a space for students, having a, maybe not 24/7, but, when campus is open, a space where those students can go and just hang out with people that they feel like they can identify with. And prior to the pandemic, there was a space, Q space, that students had. Since then, obviously, that space no longer exists. We now have the student union building.
We have the equity inclusion room, right?
But
that unity space.
Yeah.
But it's not an official LGBTQ plus spot, and it's something that students bring up. They bring them up to people like me, people who've been writing for the paper, because I've talked to multiple people about this. But what do you, as interim president, as possible president, how do you feel about that, and what changes do you want to make in that regard?
So, T, I appreciate this question a lot. And I had a chance to meet with students during a courageous conversation a couple of months ago up in the Unity Center where we talked about this pretty extensively. And it was helpful for me because I learned a little bit about the history of the Q space. So we had a really incredible professor who was full-time faculty member who helped make that space possible, and I understand that he used his office, and that's where it first grew out, and then he kind of stretched it into a couple of other spaces on campus. The issue is less about coming back from the pandemic and more about the fact that we opened a new building during the pandemic. So we're sitting on the edge of our old building where almost all student life lived. Mm-hmm. And what we did during the pandemic is we brought up the student union, and they planned for some spaces in the student union building that aligned with the learning communities like Umoja and Puente and Honors. Because the LGBTQ community wasn't formalized into a cohort, somehow it didn't get taken into account as a whole freestanding space. The Unity Center, I think, was the original plan was, this is a space that'll get used for things that aren't official learning community cohorts. So that's a little bit of the way that I understood the history. And I'm still really new, so it's possible I missed some piece of that. But what I shared with the students at that time was, one, I'm a member of the LGBTQ plus community. I have spent my life out in education, and so I benefited from a number of important resources, mainly around kind of support group spaces. And at the time, it was less about the geography. I think, this is like 35 years ago. And just the fact that there were places where we could like reserve a room and be, felt like that was incredibly progressive at that point. So we're in a different world now. Students are much more likely to be out, to be coming out. We're coming out across a rainbow spectrum of who we are. And we have some different needs. And so we talked during that courageous conversation about what it would look like for us to reassign space, look at different options. And so that's on our list of things that we'll be doing. We're in the middle of facilities master planning, which is going to help us look at where we want to be over the next 10 years. What are the spaces that we actually build from the ground up? What are spaces that we're renovating for new purposes? And it looks really different in the year 2023 than it did when we built lots of these spaces. So we're going to be going back through and kind of realigning who we are now, what the work is that we're doing, what our students ask for. What we give students that they haven't yet figured out that they need. So that's an important part when you're thinking through this. So over the course of next year, we will be meeting in focus groups with students. We'll be talking with different kinds of students about what the physical space is, what it could look like for them. And so there will be a formal planning piece where we're talking particularly about the LGBTQ plus community and what a resource center would look like. And in the meantime, what we're doing now is trying to make sure that we're using the available space that we have. So we talked a lot about scheduling out the Unity Center more directly, but it doesn't quite feel like the same thing, right? So if you're looking over at the Umoja program and you think, that's a space that's open, almost 40 hours a week, this is what's happening in there. These are the things that folks are benefiting from. We don't have something that's an analog for the LGBTQ plus. But I think we're working on it. And so the fact that you're hearing from students is really important to me because it shows where the need is so that we're not building something in advance, but we're going to be able to build it with the students who would like to be impacted by it.
So for this 10-year plan, where is the current, I guess, scheduling at? Like, in what phase of this planning are people in? Are we looking at, what buildings are possible? Is it purely budgetary at the moment? What's...
Yeah. So this is kind of major scale planning.
Mm-hmm.
So we've developed a steering committee. We've reached out to LMCAS to see how they want to be included in the conversations. We contracted, the district on our behalf, contracted with architects and planners who are shaping out what this looks like. We had a meeting in April at our college assembly where they talked to us about what to expect, how to get ready, what work they're going to do over the summer. And then in the fall semester, we will work together with different constituent groups across campus to look at the things we know we need to move forward on. And then they'll build out that plan. We don't have enough money to build all the things that we'll dream up in the plan. So this effort will help us get ready in case we want to go out for a general obligation bond, which is when we ask our community members who own property to vote in a tax on themselves to share it with us to build our buildings. So we have expended the resources from our last bond. And our last two buildings that we brought up on the Pittsburgh campus is the Student Union building and then the expansion in the Kinesiology and Athletic Center. So those got funded with a bond. And then the Brentwood Center, right? We built that whole thing with money from our community. So if you don't have a good plan, you can't talk to voters about what you want to need, what you want to see happen. And so this is step one for us to know what we need. And then step two is share that with our community so that they know what we need. We ask them for their help and support. And then the next one is building out based on priorities.
Okay. I mean, yeah. No,
so
you do
that's
have
kind of where we are.
Yeah. You have to start somewhere.
Right. It may be that we're able to renovate something smaller and more locally in terms of the resource center. So if we're thinking about that, we also want to think about how we're staffing that. So we can't make a space for students that goes unsupervised. And so it's one thing to find a room. The more expensive piece is actually paying to employ somebody to help do support and programming work for that community. And one of the things I asked for some help with from cabinet members is how are we reaching out to nonprofit organizations in our community, particularly in the LGBTQI community, to come onto our campus and help serve our students. So I think one of the things we're in the middle of right now is knowing what external resources are available to us that we can pull in. Because I think it's a little more than just saying, here's a safe space. I want to make sure that we're programming inside that safe space so that students are learning and experiencing and feeling supported beyond just the geography of a room. That part's pretty easy in the short run.
Well, I guess a lot of the more on the ground feelings towards these proposals and these plans is that they're all administrative in nature. They're not something that is trickling down to the student level. So in the student eye, nothing's happening at the moment. And that's a very pressing matter for a lot of students who may feel that not everyone is as open and welcoming as you would hope they would be, given the fact that we live in the year 2023. So what is your response to those students who feel like there is a lack of inclusion that is offered to them both from faculty and from staff?
It's hard because we're talking about them as a big group and they're not here for me to hear from them directly. So I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, if I can.
Yeah.
So I think that there are a couple of ways that we show inclusion. I really would like us to think a lot about belonging. So how is it that I know that I belong here? And I might look around for things that are symbolic. And so when I look around campus, I feel like there is a need for greater color on our buildings, greater representation of all of us who are here in different ways, both representationally what we look like and things that are important and significant for us. On June 1st, we're going to raise the inclusive pride flag. We're doing work in what June looks like. That's always kind of a funny time period because it's after the semester's ended, right? And it's before summer is really getting going. So that big symbolic piece is one part. There's a big pride flag in the Unity Center that's hanging, and we've talked about what we can do to make that more exterior facing. And I think it's part of how you feel like you walk into a space and you can see yourself represented. So I think there's a piece of that that's about what it means, especially because our building's really new, what it means to go in there and make that space more hospitable, more symbolically aligned with who we are.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's, and we talked about that day at the Courageous Conversation. So I think that's a piece that we need to do. I think we need to have conversation about how our frontline staff work with students. What's it like when you walk up to a desk? Do you feel like you're being seen for the whole of who you are? Is your name being recognized for what you want it to be? How comfortable are you when people are referring to you? So I think as we help people with what we call professional development, right, ongoing learning in your job, one of the things we want to do is help people see the broad strokes of who our students are and how we serve them. So I think that's a piece of it. I think our classroom instruction in some places is really, really progressive, right, and looks at kind of the whole of our current society. And I think in some other places it's probably not as much. So helping faculty think about that in a way that emphasizes that's really critical. And I think I can understand from the way that you're asking the questions, like this sense that it really needs to be the geography that marks belongingness. And so that's a hard one to immediately flip a switch on because it's a lot of tax resources that we have to be accountable for. So we have to kind of build up the space around that. But I would think within the next year or so, we'll have that kind of figured out. That's not an immediate good answer. There are things that we can do immediately more responsively that are less permanent. So it's a little bit of a both and.
Well, I find it interesting that you touch on the faculty aspect because another big complaint that I've received is that faculty will often, especially faculty who is not as inclusive or welcoming, will use something like academic freedom to maybe not have to personally ascribe to a certain openness of LGBTQ plus students or even students of color. They will typically throw up that blanket defense of, in my academic interest, this is not something I see a need to cover, yet it is obviously a huge part of this campus, as this is a very diverse and inclusive, it's a very diverse campus. So given that fact, how do you feel on faculty and some not being as willing as others to move forward with such ideas and concepts?
Well, there is a kernel in what you said that is accurate. So academic freedom does protect academics from being mandated to do something in their instructional space. We flipped that around. I had academic freedom, and I really appreciated it. It allowed me to be out in a classroom. It allowed me to talk about things that at the time were a little more taboo. We tend to think about academic freedom as the protection to take risk. Mm-hmm. And that's when it's most vibrant. You're not going to get fired for trying something new. You're not going to get fired for offering a critique about the state. Academic freedom shouldn't get used to kind of hold you back from trying something new. And I think for the most part, our faculty aren't doing that. There are faculty who feel like their discipline might be so specific that they don't see how talking about a queer identity might play a role in math class, for example. So it's it's like, well, my discipline's mathematics. I'm not sure how these pieces about society fit in there. But even there, I think most of our faculty realize that's probably not all that accurate at the end of the day. Stats course is a perfect place to talk about LGBTQIA because you're thinking about statistical information. You can do a lot of interesting things with that. So I think sometimes it's about encouraging people to be more open to a risk. I think it's incumbent on the college to provide resources to faculty so they have a chance to grow and stretch. I think it's about helping people see why it's important to see students as whole beings. Mm-hmm. And I think when we help faculty see that, then they feel much more likely to step into that. And it's not a great excuse, but they've been doing what they've been doing for a really long time. And helping them make adjustments and shifts in that can be a little more complicated. In a way, it's a little bit like coming out. Like, I knew I was gay the whole time, but when I told my mom, she had to adjust right then. And I needed to give her more space to get comfortable with that. So in a way, it's also about helping get people to where we want them to go. And I don't mean that in kind of an incrementalist sort of a way, but it's about helping people see different priorities.
Well, I guess the follow-up to that would then be, is that incremental change in how they may perceive people, how they may feel that perception is applicable to their in-class teachings, is that something that is more important than the student's ability to express themselves and the student's ability to feel comfortable and seen in a classroom? Because I do feel like that is the counterpoint to that, is that there is a, if a student doesn't feel comfortable with how a professor is, say, misgendering them, or perhaps they read their name on a transcript or on a grading paper, and that's not the name that they go by. And how do you
That's
enforce? But how do you enforce that in that sense?
Right.
Because then, if the professor is, under their academic freedom, they, this isn't something that.
So that's different. Academic freedom doesn't protect faculty from being discriminatory, harassing people, and not following our policies. So when we get down to an individual basis, if there's a student who is experiencing discrimination or harm, that's a piece where students should make a complaint. We have a really clear complaint policy. It gives us an opportunity to follow through on that and actually engage in meaningful conversation that might lead to discipline, right? So that's a different piece. When we were talking about discipline as a field of study, helping faculty see where larger conversations fit in that, that's kind of an academic response.
Well, I guess what I mean is that those are still intertwined at a degree. In a degree that, if a faculty member doesn't see the necessity in including it in their studies, then they may not see the importance in including it in their day-to-day life. So
those are points on a spectrum, though.
But that's what I mean, is that is a spectrum that students feel is lacking.
Yep. So I just want to be able to separate them out for the answer.
Okay.
So how I treat human beings is part of my professional responsibility. And the college has really clear guidance about that. If students are not being treated appropriately as individual humans inside a classroom, we have a process for that. The other piece is a little more related to how we're working in a social whole to move people further to where we want them to go. That piece is a little academic. Some of that involves professional development. Some of that is kind of grassroots pressure up, and that's really helpful. So, be the change you want to see. So part of this is how we help people understand that changing a classroom environment to be the most inclusive, the most aware of belongingness, and how that's related to student retention and success. Having students want to stay, having students succeed as a result of that is really important for us to help faculty see how crucial that is. So that's like a college responsibility for helping provide the opportunity for faculty to get there. The other piece is about protecting students as humans inside a classroom. So if ever a student experiences any kind of discrimination or harm, made to feel less than, that's something that we want to know about, and we intervene on that. I'd like to think that we do that reasonably well, and people come out of that better than they started. One of the conversations that we had during our Courageous Conversation space is, how do students figure out how to enter into a process to be able to put their hand up and say, I've had a bad time, I've had something happen. And so we're going to work this summer on making sure that students get a lot of information about where to go, how to raise concerns, what that system looks like, and how we follow through with it. So that's something that we're working on.
Okay. Well, I mean, that is That is nice to hear. I guess what's the best way to word it is that because it's something that, again, it's like the planning of new facilities, because it is something that is more, I guess, administrative in nature when it comes to development of the faculty, of their planning, of their curriculum, and then inverse, if they do apply that to themselves as a person, how does a student know that that complaint is going to see its fullest extent? How do they know that that exact specific scenario is going to be resolved in a way that is beneficial for them in their time here? Because say you're like me, you're in your final semester, you get misgendered by a professor the whole semester, you file it, say halfway through, 3/4 of a way through. I wouldn't be here to know that that professor was, told that, hey, this isn't okay.
Stop with the misgendering.
Well, and that's the thing is, as a student, you don't have the ability to.
You don't have power.
Yeah, like especially in the actual hierarchy of how the college functions, you can make that complaint in class, you can voice your concerns, but at the end of the day, they're the one grading papers, they're the one handing out assignments. You don't have the ability to do so. So how does, and I know I've been localizing this to classrooms, but also at an administrative level, how do you get everyone in the college to be, if not personally accepting, then professionally inclusive?
I think that's a really great set of points, T. And I appreciate you being able to localize it to both the classroom and your own experience. So I think that's helpful. In a perfect world, those things happen faster and with greater transparency. We live in a less than perfect world that we're always kind of working to improve. So once we have a student complaint about a faculty member, it moves through a couple of steps. So one of them is the more informal level where we ask students to work directly with a faculty member they're not happy with. Sometimes that can actually simply resolve the whole issue. If it doesn't, then we kind of move it up through a chain and we go to the chair helps intervene. We go to a dean, the dean helps intervene. And then it gets to a point where if we can't get to a resolution, we go in a really formal space. And that turns into a personnel issue. And that's where you might not know the outcome really directly because it turns into some very protected privacy rights that individuals have as employees. What I hope happens is that we're able to start having more explicit and open conversations at those lower levels. So it's not something that looks like a personnel matter. And we talk about why having people's best interests at heart is using gender-related pronouns to be able to talk to people about people, to know. I've always found it to be really powerful to make sure that you know people's names. And so if you think about how gender is related to pronouns, is related to names, just at a basic level of our grammar, we can see how critical that is. So my knowing your name, T, isn't the same as me knowing what your pronoun preference is. Mm-hmm. So how do you identify T?
They, them.
And so when I think about that, then I know knowing your name means I also have to know they, them, because I'm not always going to just talk about you as T, mm-hmm. right? And so helping faculty see what that relationship is and how it plays out on them is a really important place. And so we have to help them walk through that conversation. And I'd like to be able to do it in a way that has immediate impact, what the experience is like for T in a given class in a given semester so that the change happens right away. And that's always kind of our goal. Sometimes we achieve that. Sometimes we miss the mark. And we're in the midst of working. It's one of the reasons why you said, before we started talking on record, an interest may be in teaching one day. Part of why I went into this space for myself was to be the kind of teacher I wanted to have when I had been a student. And so part of how we make these changes is to put ourselves into the spaces that we want to see improve. It's one of the reasons why I pursued academic leadership roles. I want to be the kind of person who helps make those changes happen.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so I'm encouraging you to think about teaching.
Of course. Yeah. No, always on my mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Another question, one in relation to what you've just said. In that discussion, multiple people have brought up the fact that a flag proposal hanging in the window of the Unity room was proposed, mm-hmm. and then that idea was shot down. Why was that idea not followed through with? And yeah.
I'm going to have a hard time remembering all the way that conversation went. It seems to me that I remember there are slats on the outside of the student union building,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm making hand gestures. So they go like this, and you can't actually see into the space
Mm-hmm.
because it's up on the second floor, and it has these sun protecting. It's a sustainability piece of the building. So I don't think the idea was to shoot it down. It was to try to think through how you could actually, if there was a way that we could make the colors run in alignment with the slats.
Mm-hmm.
I remember talking about that, and whether or not there was something else that we might do that was just better. So I don't think the college has any concerns about flying the flag loudly and proudly. I think it was a technical thing about whether or not it would actually have the impact that people were talking about.
Well,
So did you get a different impression of that?
From people who had attended the meeting, the idea seemed that it was something budgetary, that it would have messed with something that could not be easily. It could have been resolved in a matter of, perhaps specifically the example I heard was that it was the blinds. And I don't,
Oh, somebody did ask if we could redo the blinds or attach a flag to the blinds. And I think that got a big no because the blinds are incredibly expensive. And so attaching things to them was a no.
Well, and that was what I then was confused by, because I know a few people who work in renovation. Blinds aren't that expensive. We'd have to be buying some
They're
pretty...
made out of like metal, bro.
These are like see-through aluminum heat reflecting. I don't want to dispute this, and I don't mean to sound like I'm being difficult about it. They're really expensive blinds, and because they serve this kind of sustainability feature. They're supposed to reduce heat transfer through the windows, and they're mesh, so we can't attach something. If they were like old-fashioned roll-up blinds,
Mm-hmm.
it'd be really easy to just blue tape something to the inside of them. That would
Mm-hmm.
be fine. But I don't even think that we totally ruled that out. We just shared the fact that the blinds are, in fact, I think I'm the one who talked about how expensive the blinds were. So I'm pretty open to making the flag readily available.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the blinds piece was a no.
Well, and I guess it's a representative topic on how students feel, because when they do bring up something like that and then they're told that blinds are too expensive, it feels rather, whether that's the case or not, it feels as if they're being told no for a rather made up reason. Because, like I said, to the average person, they know that blinds are pretty cheap. Obviously, these blinds sound much more technically advanced than the average.
They're very technically advanced blinds.
But that said,
Mhm.
that's something that students, especially students who are concerned with not having a space, with not having as much representation as they feel that they deserve, that is something that feels, rather poignant, rather, no, we're not going to do this because of this other reason that's technically unrelated, but also is going to stop us from doing this thing you're asking for.
So in that conversation that you were having with folks, did anybody talk about the fact that we talked about painting the room?
Nope.
But I guess that's...
I'm curious about that, because part of what
I had heard about painting the room, but
Yeah.
the reason people wanted the flag to hang in the windows is that you can see it from the outside. People wanted it to be a actual representative piece from the outside, something to show inclusion. Because if you have to go all the way up to the second floor into the room
to see the paint,
that wouldn't exactly serve the same purpose. It may be nice. It may serve a purpose to the same extent.
Once you're inside the room, it serves its purpose.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I'm interested about, and I think I want to make sure that I'm not being dismissive about the blinds, right? So what I'm hearing you say is the student response to hearing why the blinds didn't work was that it was a shutdown about exterior representation of the LGBTQIA group. So hang on.
Yeah.
There are lots of other ways to do that.
Of
That
course.
might even have more impact that are outside and exterior. One is to do murals, which is what I'm particularly interested in. So the permanent president might be really into doing kind of mural painting, at which time we would actually put paint on the outside of buildings, which would be great. But we can also actually attach flags to the outside of buildings. We could do more with flags. It's getting hung up on the issue about the window space up there is just kind of a complex thing. One, it's got these metal lats. Two, you have to look up from the ground up And it is actually really hard to see inside those spaces. So even if we had the flags up in some way, I don't think it'd be all that visible from the ground. So I think if the goal, I think what we have to do is establish what the goal is. Is the goal to have pride flag demarcation to signal belongingness? Then I think we have to think about the different ways we might do that.
I think the main issue is simply representation of inclusion. I think that's the biggest thing. And I do think that, it is the one example of it, and it is an example that, was not followed through. And I think it leaves a bigger impact when there are less things available already. When you already don't have as many showcases and indicators around campus already, the one example of it being turned down, it does leave a more significant mark than if we had multiple flags around campus, if we already had murals, if we already had other indicators. This is something that students feel like if you're going to make a first step, you need to start somewhere. But if you can't start, then that leaves a different taste in people's mouth.
I think one of the things that I'm taking away from this conversation is a little bit about the time-space continuum. So in my experience of what that conversation was like to this moment, I felt like we were just starting to make the list and we were getting ready to start to do the work. And I think how students represented it to you and what you're carrying forward today is we raised the issue and we would have liked to have seen something really immediate happen as a consequence. And so I think the failure might not be whether or not it's on the windows, whether or not it's outside, whether or not it's on the flag, but a way to come back and close the loop on that conversation about we made this list as a result and we were going to get started on it, to here's when we're going to do the first thing on the list. Here's where we're going to do the second thing on the list. And I think we may have dropped the ball on that.
Well, and I think that is what most people, I would say, are looking for. They are looking for something that is, a bulleted list of this is what we plan to do. This is the steps we're taking for that. And I feel like not having something more readily available than, a single conversation that happened a couple of months ago that not everyone could attend for various reasons. Like I couldn't go because I had an appointment that I had made months in advance and I didn't know about it until the week before. So something like that isn't, it's not readily accessible. Yeah.
It's not enough.
And that's, I feel, where much of the concern ended up coming from, was that it was a singular showcase. And even if that showcase did come away with some ideas, those ideas were not shared to its fullest extent.
I hear you on that.
And with that, we are at 3:03. You did say you had only a limited amount of time. Micah, I guess we have to wrap up then.
Yeah. So is there anything else you would like our audience to know?
Anything you want to shout out? Anything you want to mention in particular?
Well, I'm not exactly sure when you publish this.
Typically go for the
20
same
minutes.
In literally 20 minutes. I will tell you how excited I am about our commencement ceremony and graduation on Friday. And so I know that T's going to be there.
Yeah, T will be there.
Yeah, totally.
You're going to be there.
I'm not graduating.
But you're going to celebrate. There are stands.
We'll see.
There are places open. We're really excited about graduation, and I am thrilled that you're going to be there. Mm-hmm. And I'm excited about all the work students did all year long this semester. Degrees, certificates, people coming to see you and celebrate. I think it's going to be really wonderful.
And I hope it is. I remember going to my mom's in 2017 or something like that.
I love that you got to go to your mom's.
Yeah,
I got to go to my mom's too.
It was hot. It was like 85 degrees, and
hot.
I made the mistake of wearing jeans. It's
going to be hot.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, poor mistake on my end.
Yeah, and it's the middle of the day,
Mm-hmm.
so drink water, hydrate.
2 p.m.
Graduation, hydration. 2 p.m.
Anyways, I have some more things we need to shout out. I want to shout out to our moms out there. We just celebrated Mother's Day a couple days ago, so shout out to moms.
Yes.
Thanks, Mom.
We're big fans of moms.
Yes. Very important job. They should be paid, but
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Another shout out that I had to is I wanted to shout out I forgot what it was.
Aaron for giving us a USB. Thanks,
yeah,
bro.
Aaron, you're pretty epic. I love you, Aaron.
Thanks, Lance, for the production as always. And
yeah, that's all. I think we have to shut out.
Yeah.
All right. See ya.
Thank you.
I'm just going to say one last piece, which is I'm so excited that we have a podcast with the LMC Experience.
Of course.
And so I'm thrilled to have been guest number 10.
Of course, yeah.
Great. Thank
Was it
you.
number 10?
Yes, nice round number.
I feel like it closes the semester up.
Oh, also,
We're gonna have
before we do stuff, I'm going to have to say next episode is going to be a very sad episode. So
very, very sad episode indeed. 11 will be the technical semester end.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but that's okay.
but that'll also be T's last.
Yeah, a little private thing. Not private, but like, not
more intimate.
Yeah, not giving a lot of specifics on it just yet.
No, no specifics. I'm just saying it's your
Maybe
last.
T comes back
Maybe
We'll see.
and celebrates.
we'll see.
Shares the accomplishments.
That definitely is a possibility.
Very cool. People love to hear what it's like when you go on.
That's true.
I'll always be here as always.
As always,
Eventually, we're hoping you graduate too, Micah.
hopefully.
I'll be graduating next spring, so
Well,
I
there
don't
you
have to
go.
worry
See,
about it
it's
now.
not always. All right.
Year.
But
Thank you both.
yeah.
All right.
Thank
Thank you for listening.
And bye-bye.
Love you, Mom. Bye.